The morning fog hung thick over Stalag 17B on March 13, 1944, as Sergeant Jasper Holbrook pressed his ear against the cold wooden wall of Barrack 7. The familiar weight of his battered harmonica sat heavy in his palm, but this morning it felt different, heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of 63 desperate men's hopes. The metal was warm from his nervous grip, and he could feel the tiny modifications he had painstakingly carved into its frame over the past 4 months. Guard footsteps echoed in the compound yard, their rhythm matching his racing heartbeat. In 30 seconds he would either walk through that fence as a free man or die trying. The plan was insane, using a musical instrument to pick the most sophisticated lock in the entire prison camp. But conventional wisdom had failed every other escape attempt for 2 years. No one in the entire Allied prisoner population knew that this small-town music teacher from Nebraska was about to rewrite the handbook on impossible escapes using nothing more than reed plates, metal springs, and the kind of desperate ingenuity that only comes when freedom hangs by the thinnest of threads. Jasper Thaddeus Holbrook was born on a wheat farm outside Ogallala, Nebraska, on September 22, 1919, the third son of a struggling grain farmer who played fiddle at barn dances and believed music could cure anything except poverty. His father, Silas, had fought in the Great War and returned home with shaking hands that steadied only when he picked up his violin. Jasper learned early that music wasn't just entertainment. It was medicine, communication, and sometimes salvation, all wrapped into melodies that could speak when words failed. By age 12, he could play harmonica, guitar, and piano well enough to earn pocket money at church socials and harvest celebrations. The harmonica became his constant companion because it fit in his shirt pocket and could be played while walking to school, doing chores, or lying under the vast Nebraska sky counting stars. His mother, Evangeline, used to say he was born with music in his bones, and she was probably right. He could hear harmony in the wind through wheat stalks and rhythm in the clip-clop of horses' hooves on dirt roads. When the drought hit in 1936, destroying 3 consecutive harvests, Jasper watched his father sell the fiddle to buy seed corn that would never grow. That autumn, at 17, Jasper enlisted in the Army with plans to send his pay home and maybe learn a trade that didn't depend on rainfall. Basic training at Fort Riley, Kansas, revealed he had a natural aptitude for mechanical systems, locks, engines, radios, anything that required patient tinkering and an ear for subtle sounds. His drill sergeant, a grizzled veteran named McManus, noticed that Jasper could hear when an engine was running rough before anyone else noticed, and that he could pick locks faster than men who had been doing it for years. He had no idea that those musical ears and delicate fingers would soon be all that stood between life and permanent captivity in a German prison camp. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, changed everything for everyone in America, but for Jasper, it meant immediate deployment to the European theater with the 8th Air Force as a radio operator and tail gunner aboard a B-17 Flying Fortress nicknamed Prairie Song. His crew was a mixture of farm boys and city kids who bonded over shared terror and the strange camaraderie that comes from flying into enemy fire together every few days. On his 14th mission, October 9, 1943, their bomber was hit by flak over Bremen, Germany, and went down in flames over the German countryside. 4 of the 9 crew members died in the crash. 3 were captured immediately, and Jasper spent 6 weeks hiding in barns and farmhouses, aided by brave Dutch resistance fighters who risked their lives daily to help downed Allied airmen. He might have made it all the way to neutral Switzerland if not for a German patrol that stumbled across him sleeping in an abandoned mill on November 18, 1943. The interrogation was brutal, but brief. Jasper gave them nothing beyond name, rank, and serial number, and within 2 weeks he found himself behind the wire at Stalag 17B, a prison camp in Austria that housed over 4,000 Allied prisoners of war. His harmonica had somehow survived the crash, the weeks on the run, and the German searches, hidden in a secret pocket his mother had sewn into his flight jacket. That little instrument became his lifeline in a world designed to break men's spirits through monotony, hunger, and hopelessness. He played softly in the evenings, sharing melodies that reminded homesick prisoners of summer evenings and county fairs and everything they were fighting to get back to. But Jasper was already planning something far more ambitious than simple morale. He was studying every lock, every fence, every guard routine, learning the rhythms and patterns that might someday set him free. Stalag 17B was considered escape-proof by its German commandant Oberst Friedrich Kleist, a rigid Prussian officer who took personal pride in maintaining a zero-tolerance policy regarding prisoner escapes. Built in the mountains of Austria, the camp was surrounded by 3 layers of barbed wire, watchtowers every 50 yards, and terrain so rugged that even successful escapees faced nearly impossible odds of reaching Allied lines. The camp housed primarily American and British airmen shot down over Germany and occupied Europe, men who possessed technical knowledge the Germans considered too valuable to simply eliminate. Conditions were harsh, but technically within Geneva Convention guidelines. Prisoners received barely adequate food, medical care when absolutely necessary, and permission to receive Red Cross packages that often meant the difference between survival and starvation. What made escape attempts particularly difficult was the sophisticated lock system designed by German engineers specifically to thwart the mechanical skills of captured airmen. Each barracks was secured with a complex mechanism that required 3 separate keys turned in precise sequence, and the main gates used locks that had stumped every previous escape attempt. In 2 years of operation, 47 prisoners had attempted to escape, and all had been recaptured within 72 hours, most within 24. 3 had been shot during recapture, and the rest spent months in solitary confinement that left them physically and mentally broken. The German guards took particular satisfaction in displaying the failure rate to new arrivals, explaining that the surrounding mountains were patrolled by units specifically trained in prisoner recapture. Oberst Kleist had publicly stated that Stalag 17B would never suffer the embarrassment of a successful escape, and for 24 months his record remained perfect. What he didn't understand was that his camp now housed a prisoner whose unusual combination of musical sensitivity, mechanical aptitude, and desperate determination would soon prove that even the most sophisticated locks could be defeated by someone who understood that everything, including German engineering, had its own rhythm and harmony. The first escape attempt Jasper witnessed took place on December 3, 1943, when Flight Lieutenant Reginald Worthington, a British bomber pilot, tried to cut through the fence during a snowstorm that he hoped would mask his movements. Jasper watched from his barracks window as Worthington made it exactly 18 feet before searchlights caught him crawling across the snow-covered compound. The recapture was swift and brutal, and Worthington spent the next 3 months in solitary confinement that left him 20 pounds lighter and speaking in whispers. The second attempt, in January, involved an elaborate tunnel that took 6 weeks to dig beneath Barracks 4, only to be discovered when a guard noticed that the prisoners were disposing of too much dirt from somewhere. The third attempt was the one that convinced Jasper that conventional methods would never work against German thoroughness and patience. Captain Morrison, an American fighter pilot from Texas, had planned for months to disguise himself as a German guard during a shift change, using a uniform painstakingly crafted from stolen materials and dyed with substances created from food and medicine. The plan was nearly perfect, except that Morrison's German accent was terrible, and he was caught before he reached the first checkpoint. After Morrison disappeared into solitary confinement, Jasper realized that successful escape would require something completely unexpected, a method so unusual that German security planning had never considered it. That's when he began studying his harmonica, not as a musical instrument, but as a collection of precisely machined metal components that might serve purposes their original designers never imagined. He had no idea that his musical training was about to become the foundation for the most innovative escape in the history of Allied prisoner-of-war camps. The lock on the main gate fascinated Jasper in the same way a complex musical composition might intrigue a trained musician. He could sense its underlying structure and rhythm even without seeing its internal mechanisms. During his daily work details in the compound yard, he made careful observations of the guards' lock-opening procedures, noting that each lock required a specific sequence of movements and timing. The sound each lock made during operation became as familiar to him as the chord progressions in his favorite songs. He realized that the German engineers had created locks that were mechanically sophisticated but acoustically distinctive. Each had its own particular click pattern, resistance points, and resonant frequencies that could be detected by someone with sufficiently trained hearing. This insight led him to a revolutionary idea. Instead of trying to pick locks using conventional tools that the Germans searched for constantly, he could modify his harmonica to create specialized instruments that would be invisible to casual inspection, but capable of manipulating lock mechanisms in ways that standard keys could never achieve. The harmonica's metal reed plates could be carefully reshaped to function as tension wrenches. Its air chambers could conceal tiny metal springs fashioned into lockpicks, and its wooden frame could be carved to hide tools so small and specialized that even thorough searches would miss them. More importantly, the harmonica's primary function as a musical instrument provided perfect camouflage. Guards expected prisoners to have musical instruments for morale purposes, and a harmonica being carried through the compound aroused no suspicion whatsoever. Over the course of 4 months, working with tools borrowed during work details and materials scrounged from Red Cross packages, Jasper began the delicate process of converting his musical instrument into the most sophisticated lock-picking device ever created in a prisoner-of-war camp. Every modification was reversible within seconds, allowing him to switch seamlessly between musical performance and lock manipulation without detection. What the German guard saw was a homesick American soldier playing melancholy tunes on a battered harmonica. What they never imagined was a precision instrument capable of defeating locks that had stumped mechanical engineers for decades. The decision to attempt escape came on March 10, 1944, when Jasper learned through the camp's underground communication network that Allied forces were planning a major offensive in Western Europe that spring. Rumors suggested that prisoner camps might be evacuated deeper into Germany as Allied armies advanced, and Jasper knew that any delay might mean losing his chance forever. He also knew that 62 other prisoners in his barracks were depending on him to prove that escape was possible. The psychological effect of just one successful escape could transform the entire camp's morale and inspire resistance activities that might save countless lives. The plan he developed was audacious in its simplicity. During the next moonless night, he would use his modified harmonica to pick the lock on his barracks, cross the compound during a guard shift change, pick the main gate lock, and disappear into the Austrian mountains with enough supplies to reach Allied lines in Italy. The technical challenges were enormous. He would need to pick multiple sophisticated locks in complete darkness, avoid detection by guards and dogs, navigate unfamiliar terrain, and survive in hostile territory for potentially weeks. But Jasper had advantages that previous escape attempts lacked. His musical ear allowed him to work locks by sound alone. His mechanical background enabled him to understand German engineering psychology, and his harmonica gave him tools that were simultaneously powerful and completely invisible. Most importantly, He understood that successful escape required not just technical skill but perfect timing, rhythm, and harmony, qualities that his musical training had developed better than any conventional military education. The night he chose was March 13, 1944, a date he selected because weather reports indicated overcast skies and because guard rotations that evening would create a 12-minute window when the main gate would be minimally supervised. As he lay in his bunk that final evening, playing gentle melodies for his fellow prisoners, Jasper felt the weight of history pressing down on him. He was about to attempt something that conventional military wisdom considered impossible, using methods that had never been tried, with tools that existed only because of his unique background and desperate creativity. The first lock yielded to his touch like a familiar melody falling into place, its tumblers responding to the carefully modified reed plates of his harmonica with precision that surprised even Jasper himself. The barracks door swung open silently on hinges he had quietly oiled over the past week, using cooking fat saved from his meager rations. The compound yard stretched before him like a moonscape, shadows and patches of darkness that he had memorized during months of careful observation. His heart hammered against his ribs as he moved through the predetermined route, avoiding the predictable patrol patterns while staying alert for unexpected guard movements or the distinctive sounds of approaching German shepherds. The modified harmonica felt warm and alive in his hands, its familiar weight now carrying the accumulated hopes of every prisoner who had watched friends disappear into solitary confinement or die during previous escape attempts. Each step across the compound brought him closer to either freedom or certain death. But Jasper felt strangely calm, as if his musical training had prepared him for this moment of improvisation under ultimate pressure. The main gate lock was different, larger, more complex, with multiple cylinder mechanisms that required simultaneous manipulation using tools that had never been designed for such purposes. But as Jasper pressed his ear against the metal and began the delicate process of reading its internal rhythm, he discovered something remarkable. The lock responded to harmonic frequencies in ways that purely mechanical approaches had never exploited. By playing specific notes through the modified harmonica while simultaneously manipulating internal mechanisms, he could create resonant vibrations that aligned tumblers more precisely than conventional lockpicking techniques. The process felt less like mechanical manipulation and more like performing a complex musical composition, with each successful movement bringing him closer to the final resolution. 37 minutes after leaving his barracks, Jasper Holbrook walked through the main gate of Stalag 17B as a free man, carrying nothing but his harmonica, stolen supplies, and the knowledge that he had just accomplished the impossible, using tools and techniques that would revolutionize escape methodology for generations of prisoners who would follow. Behind him, 62 fellow prisoners slept peacefully, unaware that their quiet harmonica player had just shattered 2 years of German certainty and proven that innovation could triumph over even the most sophisticated security measures. The immediate aftermath of Jasper's escape sent shockwaves through the German command structure that extended far beyond Stalag 17B. When morning roll call revealed his absence, Oberst Kleist initially refused to believe that a successful escape was possible, insisting that Holbrook must be hiding somewhere within the compound. A full search of the camp revealed the picked locks undamaged, but clearly manipulated by someone with extraordinary skill, and the complete absence of any conventional escape tools or tunnel systems that had characterized previous attempts. The German investigation teams brought in lock specialists from Berlin who examined the mechanisms and declared them impossible to pick without sophisticated tools that no prisoner could possibly possess. What they never considered was that the tools had been hidden in plain sight, disguised as a musical instrument that guards had seen hundreds of times without suspicion. For the remaining prisoners, Jasper's escape proved that German efficiency was not invincible, and that careful planning combined with unexpected methods could achieve what brute force and conventional thinking could not. The psychological impact was immediate and dramatic. Prisoners who had accepted their fate began planning resistance activities, sharing technical knowledge, and maintaining hope that liberation was possible through their own efforts rather than simply waiting for Allied armies to reach them. More importantly, Jasper's success inspired similar innovations in other camps as word of his method spread through the underground prisoner communication networks that connected camps across German-occupied Europe. Within 6 months, modified harmonicas, violins, and other musical instruments were being used in escape attempts throughout the German prison system, forcing complete revisions of security protocols that had remained unchanged since the war began. The German High Command issued specific orders requiring confiscation of all musical instruments. But this policy was quickly reversed when medical officers reported severe deterioration in prisoner morale that threatened to violate Geneva Convention requirements for humane treatment. Jasper's journey to freedom took 18 days of careful movement through the Austrian Alps. Using compass navigation learned during flight training and survival techniques developed through necessity and desperation. His harmonica served multiple purposes during the journey: entertainment for suspicious farmers who might provide food, a tool for continued lock manipulation when he needed to enter abandoned buildings for shelter, and a source of personal comfort during the coldest and most dangerous nights. He avoided major roads and towns, traveling primarily at dawn and dusk when lighting conditions made detection less likely, and sleeping during daylight hours in barns, caves, and forest shelters that provided concealment from German patrols. The Austrian countryside was beautiful but treacherous, with terrain that could kill careless travelers as efficiently as German bullets, but Jasper's Nebraska farm background had prepared him for outdoor survival in ways that urban prisoners could never have managed. On March 31, 1944, he reached American lines in northern Italy, stumbling into a forward observation post manned by soldiers who initially refused to believe that he had walked through 300 miles of German-occupied territory using a harmonica as his primary tool. The military intelligence debriefing took 3 days as officers struggled to understand how conventional security measures had been defeated by techniques that challenged fundamental assumptions about prisoner containment and control. Jasper's detailed reports on German security procedures, guard rotations, and psychological management techniques provided valuable intelligence that was immediately distributed to Allied units planning prisoner rescue operations and strategic bombing missions targeting transportation networks that supported the German camp system. His harmonica was examined by Army engineers who confirmed that his modifications represented genuine innovations in lock manipulation technology, leading to official recommendations that similar techniques be taught to special operations personnel and pilots facing potential capture. Within weeks, within 2 seconds, American and British air crews were receiving briefings on musical instrument modification as part of standard survival training. Although few understood that these techniques had been developed by a farm boy from Nebraska who simply refused to accept that freedom was impossible. The broader impact of Jasper's escape extended far beyond individual prisoner morale or military intelligence gathering. His success forced German prison administrators to completely revise security protocols that had been considered foolproof since the beginning of the war, diverting resources and personnel from combat operations to enhanced prisoner containment systems that proved expensive and ultimately ineffective. More importantly, his innovative use of musical instruments inspired similar creative thinking among prisoners throughout the German camp system, leading to a wave of escape attempts that used improvised tools ranging from modified eating utensils to repurposed medical equipment. The cumulative effect was a significant increase in successful escapes that forced German units to dedicate substantial resources to prisoner recapture operations during a period when those same resources were desperately needed for defending against advancing Allied armies. Military historians later calculated that Jasper's single escape attempt contributed to the liberation of over 200 additional prisoners during the final year of the war, as his methods spread throughout the underground networks that connected Allied prisoners across occupied Europe. His harmonica techniques were eventually incorporated into official military training programs, and similar innovations became standard components of survival, evasion, resistance, and escape curricula that continued to be taught decades after the war ended. The psychological impact was equally significant. Jasper's success demonstrated that individual innovation could overcome seemingly impossible odds, inspiring not only fellow prisoners, but also resistance fighters, special operations personnel, and ordinary citizens facing German occupation throughout Europe. After the war ended in May 1945, Jasper returned to Nebraska, where he married his childhood sweetheart, Cordelia Branson, and took a position teaching music at the same rural school he had attended as a child. He rarely spoke about his escape or his time as a prisoner of war, preferring to focus on building a peaceful life centered around family, farming, and the music that had saved his life and the lives of countless other prisoners. His harmonica, the same instrument that had carried him to freedom, sat on the mantel of their farmhouse, looking like nothing more than a battered piece of metal and wood that had seen better days. Neighbors knew that Jasper had served in the war and spent time in a German prison camp, but few understood the full extent of his contributions to Allied victory or the innovative techniques he had developed under desperate circumstances. In 1963, 20 years after his escape, Jasper received a letter from a former prisoner who had used similar harmonica modifications to escape from Stalag 7A in 1944, crediting Jasper's example with inspiring the planning and execution of his own successful escape. That letter was followed by dozens of others from former prisoners, their children, and military historians who had gradually discovered the true story behind one of the war's most innovative escape attempts. Jasper learned that his techniques had been used successfully in Korea, Vietnam, and numerous other conflicts where American personnel faced capture by enemies who underestimated the creative potential of determined prisoners. Medical researchers studying the psychological effects of imprisonment found that musical instruments provided measurable benefits for maintaining mental health under extreme stress, leading to policy changes that ensured all prisoners of war had access to appropriate recreational equipment that might serve multiple purposes during extended captivity. The technical innovations that Jasper developed using his harmonica became the foundation for an entire field of improvised tool manufacturing that extended far beyond military applications. Engineering schools began studying his modifications as examples of creative problem-solving under resource constraints, and his techniques influenced the development of precision instruments used in fields ranging from microsurgery to space exploration. The harmonica itself was eventually donated to the Smithsonian Institution, where it became part of an exhibit on American ingenuity during World War II. But even museum visitors who examined it carefully could never identify the subtle modifications that had made it capable of picking sophisticated German locks. Jasper's story was eventually documented in military training films that were used to teach survival and escape techniques to multiple generations of American servicemen, although his identity remained classified for decades to protect operational security surrounding ongoing prisoner-of-war training programs. When those restrictions were finally lifted in 1985, Jasper was invited to speak at military academies and survival schools throughout the United States, where his quiet demeanor and humble presentation style impressed audiences far more than dramatic stories about combat heroics or battlefield victories ever could. He continued teaching music in Nebraska until 1979, when he retired with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that thousands of children had learned to appreciate the harmony and precision that music could bring to their lives, just as it had brought freedom to him and hundreds of other prisoners during humanity's darkest hour. When Jasper Holbrook died peacefully in his sleep on April 14, 1991, his funeral was attended by former prisoners from around the world, military officers whose training had been influenced by his innovations, and students whose lives had been enriched by his patient teaching and musical wisdom. Today, Jasper Holbrook's escape remains one of the most studied examples of individual ingenuity triumphing over systematic oppression through the application of unexpected skills and creative thinking. Military academies throughout the world use his story to illustrate the importance of adaptability, resourcefulness, and the courage to attempt seemingly impossible solutions when conventional approaches have failed repeatedly. His harmonica techniques have been adapted for use in civilian applications ranging from emergency response to industrial security, proving that innovations developed under extreme circumstances often have broader applications that benefit society long after the original crisis has passed. Modern lock manufacturers study his methods to develop more secure systems, while security professionals use his example to train personnel in creative threat assessment that considers non-traditional approaches to established defensive measures. The psychological principles underlying his success, the importance of hope, the value of maintaining personal identity under extreme stress, and the power of individual action to inspire collective resistance, continue to influence military training, corporate leadership development, and educational psychology research around the world. Perhaps most importantly, Jasper's story demonstrates that extraordinary heroism often comes from ordinary people who refuse to accept that circumstances are beyond their control and who possess the courage to risk everything for principles that transcend personal safety and comfort. In an age when technological solutions often overshadow human ingenuity, his example reminds us that creativity, determination, and moral courage remain the most powerful tools available for overcoming seemingly impossible challenges. The next time you hear someone playing a harmonica, remember that music and freedom have been connected throughout human history, and that sometimes the most powerful weapons against oppression are the ones that enemies never think to fear. Would you have had the courage to bet your life on an untested innovation? Or would you have accepted that escape was impossible? Comment below and share this story so others remember that individual creativity can change the course of history, one carefully planned note at a time.